Masechet Nazir, Daf Nun Tet. We're going to see a few different applications today of the prohibition here in Devarim. Lo yihye keli geber al isha velo yilbash geber simlat isha ki to'abat Adonai Elohecha kol ose ele. A woman must not put on man's apparel, but notice it says keli geber, and the word keli is ambiguous. It can mean clothing, but as we're going to see, the Gemara will apply it perhaps to other things like weapons. And also, similarly, a man shall not wear woman's clothing because this is to'eva. This is something abhorrent. Now, although the pasuk seems to be simply talking about wearing clothing, the Gemara is going to apply it to other activities, behaviors that are typically women do, men should not do, and vice versa. Amar Rav, Mekel Adam Kol Gufo Beta'ar. This is why we're talking about it. It's in the context of shaving one's head, shaving the rest of one's body, like a Mesorah has to do. Mesorah has to do it, because, whether he's male or female, because the Torah says so. And that overrides other prohibitions like cutting peot. So yes, a Mesorah will certainly have to. But now we're just talking about a regular person, everyday person, not a Mesorah, not a Nazir. Just someone who decides he feels like shaving the hair of his body. Is that permitted? Rav says a person can lighten, mekel. It's different from the word ma'avir that we're about to see. Ma'avir seems to be to remove totally. Mekel, perhaps it means to remove totally one's hair, or perhaps just to lighten, just to trim. All of a person is allowed to trim the hair of all of his body with a razor. That's what Rav says. This is permitted, and you don't have to worry about this being an effeminate act. However, we challenge Rav because a Baraita says, Metive, Hamavir bet hashechi u bet ha'irva hareze lokeh. Maybe for the rest of the body it's okay, but specifically for the hair of the armpit or the hair of the private parts, that if a person does that, they get lashes for violating this biblical law. So how could Rav say it's permitted when we have a Braita here that says it's prohibited? And the answer is ha beta'ar ha b'misparayim. When the Braita says it's prohibited, and the person would get lashes. I mean, although the Baraita only says these two areas, Rav says the whole body, so that includes these two areas. Okay, so this Baraita says it's prohibited, and one gets lashes. That's using a razor. So that would mean, because it's that's the tool that one uses, and the fact that a razor cuts all the way down to the skin, cuts the entire hair. Whereas when the Rav says it's permitted, that was talking about using a scissor. Scissors can get close, but not as close as a razor, and that would make sense with the word mekel, which means to lighten, to have a trim, but not to shave completely. Now, this would be a good answer, except that Rav said the word ta'ad. Rav actually said you're allowed to do it with a razor. He said that word. So we have to reinterpret him and say, Ke'ayin ta'ar. Rav meant that you're allowed to do it with scissors in a way similar to a razor. In other words, as long as you're not using a razor and using scissors, and you can come close, you can get a close haircut or a close trim, but you can't use a razor. Okay, so that would be it's hard to fit that into the word tad, but ke'en tad, in order to reconcile it, that's the bottom line, that according to Rav, a man can use scissors to trim, but not a razor. Okay, Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Hamavir bet hashechi u bet harva lokeh. But now we have another opinion of Rabbi Yochanan. This Rav was from Bavel. Rabbi Yochanan is from Eretz Yisrael, and he says someone who removes totally hair of the armpit or of the privates gets lashes. This is pretty much the same words, actually exactly the same words as this Baraita. So why doesn't it quote it as a Braita? I don't know, but Rabbi Yochanan also said this. But now we have a Braita that contradicts him. But now we have a Braita that's more lenient than Rabbi Yochanan. and contradicts it and says that someone who removes hair, a man we're talking about who removes hair, it's permitted for women. That's women do that normally. It's permitted for a man because it's a behavior that is typical of women. That it's not, there's no biblical prohibition, but rather only a rabbinic prohibition. Now, generally, if one violates a lav from the Torah, that's when you get lashes. So it doesn't make sense that you should get lashes. Rabbi Yochanan said one gets lashes for this, but if it's not a Torah prohibition, then one shouldn't get lashes. If it's only b'divrei sofrim, we don't usually get lashes for violating a divrei sofrim, and so we answer even in this braita, in Rabbi Yochanan, who said he gets lashes, he didn't mean lashes from a deoraita for violating the lav, but rather midrabanan for violating a rabbinic decree. It's called makat mardut, and when if someone goes against a legislation of the sages have the option. They don't always, they don't even usually do this, but if sages feel like this is something important enough, they can make someone liable for lashes for violating that derabanan. So that's what this baraita means. Really, it's only a derabanan. Okay, I mean, the Gemara could have equally brought these two baraitot back to back and say, here's this one that says lokeh, and this one says eno lokeh, and then given the same answer, that the lokeh is really referring to the Rabbanan. So this baraita and Rabbi Yochanan say the same thing, but in order to reconcile it, they have to say that it's talking only about mideh Rabbanan. Another version of this discussion of Rabbi Yochanan, Amar Rabbi Chiya bar Abba Amar Rabbi Yochanan hama'avir bet hashech ubet ha'arva loke mishum lo yilbash geber simlat isha. This braita is much more explicit that it is in fact a deoraita, because it says someone who removes armpit hair or private hair, that person gets lashes because he violated the pasuk lo yilbash. A man cannot put on a woman's garment. Right? We see here that certainly would not be prohibited to wear a garment, but the Gemara is taking it as not just actually wearing garments, but also other behaviors. And here it says it is deoraita. So we ask, Metive habarat se'ar ena midivrei Torah ela midivrei sofrim. Rabbi Yochanan, how could you say that you get lashes mideoraita if this baraita says it's only prohibited midirabanan? Divrei Sofrim is a little bit more stringent than just Derabanan. Divrei Sofrim suggests that this is a very old enactment by sages back from the time of the second Bet HaMikdash. But nevertheless, it's not a Deoraita. So the answer is Hu da amar ki haytana detanya hamabir bet hashech mishum me'ambir bet hashechi ubet harva hare ze over mishum lo yilbash geber simlat isha. The answer is that Rabbi Yochanan is following this other baraita that says someone who removes the hair of the armpit or of the privates that violates this very pasuk. So Rabbi Yochanan, either way, according to the previous version or according to this version, has a braita to back him up. According to the previous version, we'll say no, really it's only the Rabbanan and the Malkut is only Malkut Rabbanan, whereas according to this version of Rabbi Yochanan and this braita, it is in fact the oraita, and the lashes are the oraita. Okay, good. So now that we've established the second one seems like it's more straightforward, because usually when you receive lashes, that is in fact a deoraita. So now we're going to ask about the other opinion. Tanakh Kama, the previous version of the braita, that said that's only the Rabbanan if a man shaves his bodily hair. Hai lo yilbash gever mai darishbe. What is he going to do with this pasuk of wearing clothing? It can't just be about wearing clothing, because of the following question. So that Tanakh Kama will apply the pasuk of lo yilbash gever in the manner of the following baraita. לא יהיה כלי גבר על אישה, מה תמוד לומר? אם שלא ילבש איש שמלת אישה, ואישה שמלת איש, הרי כבר נאמר, תועבה היא, ואין כאן תועבה. Very interesting braita. It says, this pasuk, that a woman shall not wear the vessels of a man, what does it teach? Usually when we say matamud lomar, it's because it's an extra word. Now, this is, in fact, an extra word. In what sense? Well, if it's just telling us that simply that a man cannot wear the clothing of a woman, and a woman cannot wear the clothing of a man, that can't be it. It can't be a that simple case, because the pasuk says to'eva. This is an abomination. Well, it wouldn't be such an abomination. So if someone's wearing a costume, why would you call that such a terrible thing? So it must be that the pasuk, of course, yes, that's prohibited, but the pasuk must be referring to something else that is calling to'eva. It can't simply be this. Okay, and now actually we'll get into the reason behind this this whole pasuk. Ela shelo yilbash ish simlat isha veyesheb ben hanashim veisha simlat ish vetesheb ben ha'anashim. So the reason that why cross-dressing is prohibited is because rather the application of the prohibition, the to'eva part of it, is that not only is it applies not just if a man wears clothing of a woman, but he wears clothing of a woman and he uses that disguise to go and sit among the women. He kind of sneaks into the locker room, and then that will certainly lead to improper behavior. Or the other way around, if a woman wears men's clothing and then she, because of that, then sits among men, so in a promiscuous way. And so because of the actions that this leads to, that cross-dressing leads to, that's the reason, and actually the real application of the prohibition. That's the part, that's the to'eva. Okay, other writers have said that maybe this is connected to some idolatry, maybe there were some fertility rites in which some people dressed this way or something like that. But anyway, the Gemara here says, the dressing is the first step of the prohibition, and then the full prohibition is violated when someone acts on that, and then goes and puts themselves in a promiscuous or acts in a provocative way. That will lead to more stringent sins. רבי אליעזר בן יעקב אומר, מניין שלא תעשה אישה בכלי זין למלחמה, תמוד לומר לא יהיה כלי גבר על אישה, ולא ילבש גבר שמלת אישה, שלא יתקן איש בתיקוני אישה. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov has a completely different application and says, how do we know that a woman is not permitted to go out with weapons? Kele. So because it says kele geber, right? Kele geber, kele it could mean clothing, but it could mean other vessels. And it doesn't say ish, but geber it sounds like it's a man, a strong man, a warrior. So it's a woman is not allowed to go out with weapons, swords, and shields, and all that, because that is the clothing or the way of men to go out and fight. And the second half, that a man should not wear the clothing of a woman, that refers to fixing himself up, adorning himself with cosmetics or ornaments in the way that women do makeup or other kinds of jewelry. So you see, according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, it's not talking about the what we said before about shaving and acts like that, but rather it is actually clothing, but or adornments, but in a way that is particular to men or to women. Okay, so that's yet another application. Amar Rav Nachman ben Nazir mutar. Rav Nachman says a Nazir is permitted to shave his body. It's not clear when this is referring to. Is it talking about a Nazir who finished and is shaving his head anyway? So since he's shaving his head, and that overrides cutting peot, so then he can go ahead and also shave other parts of his body. Or is Rav Nachman also might be saying also, or instead, that a Nazir's prohibition to cut his hair applies only to the hair of his head and beard, but other parts of his body he is permitted to trim, cut in the same way as a regular person would be allowed to. But anyway, let hilchata kevate. We don't follow this halacha of Rav Nachman, and no, a Nazir is actually not allowed to cut to shave those parts of his body. אמרו לרבנן לרבי שמעון בר אבא, חזנה לרבי יוחנן דלת אמר להון מחמת זקנה נשרו. The rabbis told Rabbi Shimon bar Abba, we saw Rabbi Yochanan and he doesn't have underarm hair, right? And so they suspected maybe Rabbi Yochanan is shaving his underarm hair. I mean, Rabbi Yochanan himself said that it's prohibited. One version was Rabbanan or Doraita, but it doesn't matter. It's still prohibited. So they were curious. How come Rabbi Yochanan doesn't have hair? And they said, no, he's elderly. Rabbi Yochanan lived a very long time and fell out due to old age, and that explains why he didn't have hair. Interesting story. One time there was a person who was deserving of lashes, and he came before to be ameh. It doesn't say what he did. It doesn't matter. He did something wrong, some sin, and he deserved lashes. So as they took his shirt off to give him lashes, he saw that his underarm hair was not shaven. Amar lo Rabbi Ameh, shibku, then min habrayahu. So Rabbi Ameh saw that and he said, leave him alone. He is among the chaverim. Chaverim is like the circle of colleagues who are very careful in mitzvot. In other words, it seems that most people in that time, in that period, would, in fact, most men would shave their underarms. And so to be this guy who was deserving of lashes, by not doing so, showed that he was careful in mitzvot. And therefore, to be Ameh said, okay, whatever other thing he did that was deserving of lashes must have been out of character for him. Because this guy is actually a person that does care about Torah and mitzvot, and so he's not the kind of person who's deserving of lashes, so let him off the hook. Okay, so that's an interesting story because we see that this was, generally men did. Perhaps this is before the advent of deodorant, and would be very uncomfortable. So men did. Incidentally, this is an interesting how this whole topic is very interesting. Has many diverse and important applications. One regarding shaving different parts of one's body. If you look at poskim throughout the generations, this is kind of one area where the poskim say, well, it depends on the time and place. It depends on the culture. And in the times of Geonim and Muslim cultures, it was very common for men to shave different parts of their body, and because of that, the sage, the rabbi said, well, look, if this is common, then it's no longer considered a way of woman because all the men do it. So it really depends on the cultural perception, if this is something that only women do or if it's common among men. Anyway, it looks like here that at least some men did it. I'm not, in the general culture. So Rabbi Ameh was impressed by this individual who didn't go by that trend and went the extra mile, was extra careful and not to shave his underarms. Okay. Mahu legaleach. A question that Rav asked a question to Rabbi Chaya. What is the halacha regarding shaving underarm hair? Amar le asur, no good, not allowed. Amar le beha ka gadel. And so Rav was concerned, but it grows, and he's like concerned as if the hair is going to keep growing and it's going to be more and more uncomfortable. Amar le bar pachte zeman yesh lo kol zeman shu gadel nosher. Rabbi Chaya explained to him some basic science about hair growth. He said it in a nice way, in a way, a complimentary way. Son of nobles, right? Don't worry about this. Everything, hair has its time, and once it grows a certain length, then it falls out, which is true, right? Different, eyebrow hair, other hair, underarm hair. It doesn't keep growing for indefinite length. It's different from hair on the head or beard. This grows rather short and then it falls out, right? That's why eyebrows don't keep growing. They fall out. Okay, so in other words, don't worry, you don't have to shave it, right? It won't get too long. Be'amine Rav Rabbi Chaya, mahu lachoch. And while Rav was, we're going to have a bunch of questions that Rav asked Rabbi Chaya. And so another question is, what about rubbing armpit hair and to remove it that way? And as I understand, I'm not allowed to shave it with an instrument, but this is doing it in an unusual way, and just kind of rub it until the hair falls out. Amar le asur, that's also prohibited. All right. Now, bebigdomahu, what if you rub it through your shirt? So you're not touching the hair directly, but just kind of rubbing in the underarm area, and by rubbing enough, the hair will fall out. Amar le mutar, that's okay, right? That's very indirect, and so that's not a way of removing hair, and that would not be a violation of doing a behavior that a woman does. Even if, I guess, in the end, it may result in not in having much less hair, but that's okay. It's the act itself that is the that we're concentrating on, and so this is not an act that is effeminate. Another version. He wasn't asking about it in terms of hair removal, but rather during tefillah. That's a law. During prayer, one should not touch parts of the body that are sweaty or not clean. It's not respectful. I mean, if you were sitting in front of an important person, you wouldn't be touching parts of your body that aren't sanitary. And so that's what he was asking. But of course, you can't do it with bare hands. But what if during tefillah, through your shirt, you need to scratch your underarm? Is that permitted or not? And he says, Amar le asur. No, that's not. It's prohibited because it's not respectful to prayer. So the context of this question either was about respect for prayer or about removal. So if it's about removal of hair, then it would be permitted. If it's about respect for prayer, then it's prohibited during prayer. But the Gemara comments that the halacha is not like that answer. All right, and that concludes the section about lo yilbash, and there's a lot more to say about it. And in fact, someone wrote a recent dissertation all about the subject, tracing the application of lo yilbash through the ages in different lands, from the times of from the times of Tanakh to Talmud to Rishonim to Acharonim. And you could see really very interesting things, and just the way the cultures have changes and the application of this halacha has, and the way it was applied in different communities. All right, and then we get to the next Mishnah. Met echad mehen, amar Rabbi Yoshua yibakesh echad min hashuk sheyidor kenegdo benazir. Well, now this is a follow-up on the previous Mishnah that said, if you have two nazirim, they're walking around, and something falls on them, some bone or whatever, and one of them becomes tameh. Someone sees it, but it's not clear which one of them is tameh. So they go through this whole process I was mentioned before, that they'll share in korban tum'ah and korban tahara. And then they'll make a condition. If I'm the one that's tameh, then I'll get the tameh korban, you get the tahor one. Otherwise, vice versa. And then they both do another 30 days. And after 60 days, they share in a korban tahara. And then they make a condition regarding that. That was the previous Mishnah, and that was all well and good if you have two Nazirim and they both are alive. But what if one of them dies? So you have two Nazirim, one of them became Tameh, but we're not sure which one, and one of them dies, so they can't do this deal in order to make this arrangement that they'll share. So what are we going to do? We're going to see a couple of solutions. Amar Rabbi Yoshua yivakesh echad min hashuk sheidor kenegdo benazir. So Rabbi Yoshua says the survivor of that should go and find someone in the marketplace, anyway, a random person, and ask him if they would be willing to take upon themselves nizirut that would be corresponding to him. In other words, basically put himself in a situation similar to the counterpart, the guy who died. And this is how he would do it. Ve'omer, im tameh hayiti hareta nazir miyad. If I'm the one that became tameh, then I want you to take upon yourself a nazirut for the same time period. Let's just say 30 days. And you will start right away. On the other hand, im tahor hayiti, if I was the one that was tahor the whole time, and the one that died was tameh, then hareta nazir achas sheloshim yom. Then I want your nazirut to only begin in 30 days from now. Okay, so that way, and in the first 30 days and the second 30 days, there always will be one of them that is doing a nizirut of tahara. Now, here's the benefit. V'sofrim sheloshim umevi'in korban tum'ah ve'korban tahora. then they count 30 days, and they bring a korban for tum'ah and korban for tahorah. Now, the korban for tahorah, that should be a complete set of all 3 korbanot that are required for tahorah, which is 3 animals, because one of them is for sure tahor. The korban tum'ah is not necessarily all 3. It could just be the chatat ha'of, because chatat ha'of unlike a chatat of an animal, which you're not allowed to bring if you don't have to bring it, chatat ha'of can be brought misafek. That's a law that we saw earlier in the Masechet. Okay, ve'omer, im ani hu hatameh, korban tum'ah sheli ve'korban tahora shelcha. Listen, if I was the one that was tameh, remember when my friend was alive, and when we weren't sure if I was the one that was tameh, then this korban tum'ah is for me. This, at least the hatat ha'of and the korban Torah, on the whole set of korban Torah, that will be for you, and then you're good, you're done. However, im ani hu hatahor, korban tahora sheli v'korban tum'ah besafek. If I'm the one that was tahor the whole time, then this set of 3 animals is for my Nazirut tahara completion, whereas the korban tum'ah we just brought as safek, but really is not necessary for either of us, because in that case, none of them are tameh. So that's why, yes, you can bring just the chatat ta'of misafek. Okay, that's stage 1. Then v'sofrim sheloshim yom u'mevi'in korban tahora ve'omer im ani hatameh korban tumah sheli ve'korban tahora shelcha ve'zeh korban tahorati ve'im ani hu hatahor korban tahora sheli ve'korban tumah besafek ve'zehu korban tahoratcha. At the end of another 30 days, 60 days altogether, they bring a full set of korban tahora, all 3 animals, like they did before, and one of them is going to need it, because as follows: if I was the one that was tameh to begin with, then at the 30-day marker, the korban tum'ah was mine, and the korban tahora, all 3 were yours, and you were finished. But now I have to bring my korban tahora, so this is mine. On the other hand, if I was the one that was tahor from the beginning, the whole time, then that korban tahora of 30 days was mine. The korban tumah we brought misafek, but we didn't have to. It doesn't help anyone. And now is your turn, right? Because that was the condition to begin with. That if I am tahor to begin with, then your nazirut will only start in 30 days. So then you're going to need the korban tahora. And that way you can kind of simulate the dead guy, even though he's dead. So we can bring someone else who's not going to be safek tameh, safek tahor, but by adjusting when he has his tahor nazirut, that can simulate the position of the guy who had died, the other friend. And that's how he resolves it, according to Rabbi Yehoshua. Amar lo ben Zoma, umi shomea lo shidor kenegdo ben Nazir. Ben Zoma says, who's going to listen to him? How are you going to find someone that's going to make a vow corresponding to him as a Nazir? I mean, it's hard enough to find someone that will be a Nazir. But even, let's say, you could say, hey, I'll come and I'll hire you, I'll pay for your korbanot to be a Nazir. You could probably find someone to be a Nazir for 30 days. But for someone to act as a Nazir for 60 days, even though they're only going to get 1 credit for Nazirut, so who wouldn't want that deal? Why would anybody take that deal, right? And if to have to act as a Nazir for 60 days and only be credited as 1. So you're not necessarily going to find someone. So you can't make this guy depend on finding such a person from the marketplace that will be willing to do this. So Ben Zoma says, sorry, that's not a good solution. Ella, mevi hatat ha'of ve'olat behema. Rather, he can do it himself. His friend died. Okay, that's too bad. Now, what are you going to do? Because you are a safek tahor, safek tameh nazir. Here's what you do. You go 30 days, right, being careful, acting as a Nazir. And at the end of 30 days, you'll bring hatat ha'of. Now, the bird hatat, that will be the minimum for korban tum'ah. And olat behema, that will be for the korban tahora. Remember, in order to complete one's nazirut, you don't have to bring all 3. You have to bring at least one of them. And then that will allow a person to shave and then either restart the counting if they need to, or finish their nazirut. So you bring these 2 animals one bird rather, and one animal. Ve'omer, im tameh hayiti hatat mechovati va'ola nedaba. If I was tameh, if I'm the one that was tameh, and my friend who died was tahor, so then this bird hatat will be the one that I have to bring for the end of my tum'ah. Now the olah animal that I bring will be a voluntary offering, which you can also always bring. You can always make an olah, either something that you had to bring, or make it a voluntary. Olah can be used for both ways. On the other hand, if I was tahor this whole time, my friend who died, he was the one that was tameh, then I'm bringing the olah animal as my obligation to complete my nazirut tahorah, and this chatat bird that I'm bringing, that I only brought it out of safek. But as we said, a chatat bird you're allowed to bring misafek, unlike a chatat animal, which you can only bring if you know for sure. So that takes care of the 30-day mark. Then v'sofeh shilushim yom avi korban tahora v'omer im tam hayiti haolah rishona nedava v'zo choba v'im tahor hayiti haolah rishona choba v'zo nedava v'zo she'ar korbani. And after another 30 days, he's still going to act as a Nazir for the next 30 days. And at the 60-day mark, he brings a full set of korbanot tahora, all three animals. And he says as follows: if I was tameh in the first 30 days, so then that olah that I brought was for a voluntary offering, and now I'm bringing another olah and all the other animals, and this olah will be the one that I have to bring for my korban tahora. If on the other hand I was tahor at that time, and the olah I already brought was fulfilled my obligation, and so then this second olah animal that I'm bringing, this one will be voluntary, and I'm bringing also the other animals that I have to bring. And that way he has all of his animals. Now, even though he's bringing the olah at a different time, so in this scenario, if he was tahor the whole time, he's bringing his korban olah after 30 days, and the other two animals he has to bring at the 60-day mark. But so what? So he's bringing it at two different times. No one said you have to bring it all the same day. You have to bring something. You're obligated to bring the animal at some point. Can't delay too long, but you can bring it on different days, even a month apart. And so this is an easier solution that Ben Zoma offers. Amar Rabbi Yoshua, nimsa ze mevi korbanotav lachasaim. Aval hodu lo chachamim leben Zoma. Rabbi Yoshua says, I don't like your answer to Ben Zoma, because now you're going to bring your korbanot in halves. You have to bring your olah at one point and the rest of your korbanot at another point. And that's, to Rabbi Yoshua, that seems improper. However, Chachamim agreed with Ben Zoma, and they said that's still, it's okay. It's better to bring it at two different stages than to do this whole complicated scenario that Rabbi Yoshua had offered. Okay, and now the Gemara has a short discussion and says, Velaiteh. The Gemara now challenges Rabbi Yoshua, who said, then you're going to bring korbanot at two different times. So we say, Velaiteh, so bring it at two different times. What's the problem? What was Rabbi Yoshua's objection here? Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shemuel, Lo Amar Rabbi Yoshua, Ela lehaded ba et talmidim. And Shemuel says something interesting. Rabbi Yoshua only proposed his whole thing that you find someone from the shuk and have him take upon this nazirut and kind of simulate the friend who died. All this he only said to sharpen the minds of the students, right? Let's see if they can figure out a way to simulate that guy who died. But in fact, he wasn't actually arguing with Ben Zoma. He would agree, yeah, if you can't find someone from the shuk, and you can use the version of Ben Zoma. In fact, the Ben Zoma solution is actually simpler, easier to do, not a problem. And Rabbi Yoshua was pointing out, well, hey, what then you have to do too? Is there a way that you can bring your korbanot at once and still be able to figure out all the sefekot? And so that's why he came up with this. This is an exercise for students. This is actually a very important line. That means that in many cases, in some cases, at least, I think probably in many cases, the issues that are discussed in the Mishnah, especially the very complicated ones, are there really to sharpen the students, to develop their analytical skills, so that when you deal with really hard problems, then then everything else is an easier problem. Like when you're swinging a bat to practice, you swing 3 bats at once with weights on them, right? And then when you actually have to get up a bat, it's easy. So if you are so sharp that you can figure out these difficult cases, then actual cases that will come up in a court of law or that people will ask will then be easier. Okay, so a very important line to remember there. And finally, Amar Rav Nachman, Rabbi Yoshua ledakeh de la lisurur. Rav Nachman now points out that there is a problem in Rabbi Yoshua's rule. Rabbi Yoshua, who tried to say, oh, you're going to bring your korbanot at 2 different times. And if Rabbi Yoshua, assuming that the first thing he said was only to sharpen the students, and you're probably not going to find a volunteer who wants to take upon himself 60 days of Nazirut for the price of 30, and Rabbi Yoshua really thought that you can follow Ben Zoma. Well, if you're going to follow Ben Zoma, then you're going to kind of have to bring it at 2 different times, because you have the korban that you're bringing at the 30-day mark and the 60-day mark. And so the one, if he was tameh if he was tahor all along, he's bringing his olah at 30 days and then bring the other 2 at 60 days. So that's going to be at 2 different times. Would it be possible to bring them all at the same time? And that way, after 30 days, you bring your korban olah, but then just don't sacrifice it yet. Don't burn it. You can slaughter it and sprinkle the blood. But don't offer the insides on the mizbeach, right? Could you do that? And that way you'll be at least offering all 3 of them at the same time. Well, the problem with that is, what is Rabbi Yoshua going to do with the intestines that they not spoil, right? The problem here is that at the conclusion of the for the conclusion ceremony, he has to first cut his hair and then do a waving of the intestines before they can be put on the mizbeach. And so if he wants to try to do everything at the same time, and then that way at the 30-day mark, he brings, right, the bird in case, but he brings the olah. And so since we're talking about a case when he was tahor the whole time, the animal for olah is the one that he actually has to bring. So he brings that at that point, he slaughters it, right, so that he's finished. Just in case it was at that point. Well, and then he lets it wait around for 30 days so that in 30 days, then he can complete the ceremony with all 3 at the same time. The problem is, well, they didn't have refrigerators or freezers, and the intestines are going to spoil in the meantime. So that's a practical impossibility. So the truth is that Rabbi Yoshua is going to have to give up on his insistence on bringing all 3 of the animals at the same time. And since Rabbi Yoshua's own solution is really not practical and was only said to sharpen the students in any case, the best solution is going to be Ben Zoma, and it's going to be the one it's going to be done in a situation where you bring one animal at the 30-day mark, and then if he's tahor, and that will be the chovah for that, and then at the 60-day mark he brings the other 2, and it'll be done at 2 different times, and we'll have to be okay with that, because there's no practical way to bring it all at the same time, because the intestines will then spoil in the meantime. Baruch Adonai leolam, amen ve'amen.